Hello and welcome to the Dinosaw for week 14, another 7 curious, interesting things I saw last week. Sorry, a little bit late this week, but Easter kind of got in the way, but hopefully it's useful. Let's crack on. First one, Xenobots or Xenobots. So this is from Tufts University or University of Vermont as well. And these are frog cells that have been repurposed, essentially. So you take the stem cells, they were about to grow into tadpoles, for instance, and go through an amazing metamorphosis. However, you stop them where they are and you use some of the frog cells as different things. So there is a ball of cells with hair on the outside. You can't see the hair, but there are tiny, tiny little hairs. Normally these cilia, as they're called, would be on things like the inside of lungs. However, now they've been repurposed for propulsion. So if you could see the hairs, they would be going like the clappers, moving that little ball of cells forwards. Now, these little balls of cells, if you injure them, for instance, they will heal themselves. They can clearly move about. If they, for instance, come across a different situation, they can turn colour, so you can tell what's happened to them. They essentially have memory. They can also coalesce and work together to move things about and do tasks. So yeah, what will these be used for? Well, obviously if these were made out of human cells, they can be inert, move around your body, fixing things, doing things, delivering drugs, all sorts of things. So there you go. Slightly weird one to start with, but if you're interested in that sort of thing, have a look. It's very interesting. YouTube is hiding dislikes for certain accounts. There's a trial on at the moment for certain accounts. So why is this? Well, certain groups can coalesce outside of YouTube or even on YouTube and target certain YouTubers and basically dislike their video. If you dislike a video, the algorithm starts to notice, and you, for instance, start losing your monetized status, or your video will not be shown, for instance. So it can be used as a form of bullying online, and it's also not great for the mental health of the YouTuber or the creator. So what they're looking at is maybe what they'll do is they'll show you the amount of likes, which is the positive part. If you want to dislike it, fine, dislike it, but we won't show the actual number. So if you are the creator, you can actually go to the YouTube studio and you will be able to see the dislike count. It just won't be visible to the people watching the video. However, if you do dislike the video, you can actually show your dislike for it. It just won't be counted. So yeah, interesting how the likes of Google, i.e. YouTube, are looking at not only trying to dissuade cyberbullying or at least lessen it, but also taking note of creator comments about how sort of devastating an attack might be using dislikes. Single pixel detectors. So I'm going to try and describe this one, but this is really, really neat. So this is, so for instance, computer vision. So computer vision looks at the world around us and tries to ascertain what it's seeing. So if you are detecting dogs or cats or houses or whatever, it needs a relatively good camera with all the pixels. The higher definition camera, the better, to then figure out what's in the view. So this is a completely different take on it. This uses a single pixel. So it doesn't use, you know, thousands or hundreds of thousands of pixels like you'd normally get on a camera. This uses one single pixel, and a very novel way of doing it. So it takes that one pixel, and instead of trying to figure out all those pixels, what do they actually mean, it splits up that light and starts to interrogate the frequency of the light itself. So it uses several lenses, essentially, that can then scatter the light in different ways and then focus them back down to another single pixel. So as you see, the light is coming in on the left-hand side, it's looking at an 8. It will then scatter that spectrum, and that spectrum will, for instance, look at the frequency, will look at the amount of the light coming through, will then scatter it again, do other things to it, and then focus all those different frequencies back down onto that single pixel. So that single pixel is now looking at frequencies of light rather than clusters of pixels together, and therefore using that signature of frequency of light, it can then figure out what was in front of the camera itself. So this, why is this interesting, I guess is the question. This is interesting because the amount of processing power is hugely reduced to do these sorts of tasks. So all of a sudden you can either be doing this in multiple places or with very little processing whatsoever. I've even seen a couple of years ago this done in a solid piece of crystal. So they actually detected numbers 1 to 8, I think, or 1 to 9, and just by showing it, and that it was actually the reflections of the numbers would flow differently through a piece of crystal and therefore light up at the end of it in a different way. So yeah, really interesting a way that computer vision is evolving or regressing even in a way. Yeah, kind of weird, kind of caught my eye. Apple and Siri. So currently iOS 14.5 is in beta, so that will be released later in the year. And they're making a bit of a change. They're creating several changes. Obviously, it's a new release. However, one change is through Siri, and there are two things that are really changing. They're adding 2 more voices, and they are somewhere, if you were trying to measure sort of male and female spectrum, they are somewhat in the middle, shall we say, and they are also removing those labels of male and female, for instance. So they are now just called voice 1, 2, 3, and 4. And actually the third thing they're doing is they're making you choose when you start up your phone which voice you would like. So no longer are they defaulting to a female Siri voice. And again, so this is based on comes after a report from the UN a couple of years ago, calling out voice assistants for being sort of generically female at startup, and you can obviously change them. However, most Siri, Cortana, those sorts of things, Alexa, were all female as standard. So the UN report said, this is just prolonging the idea that women are, docile, or they're eager to help, or eager to please helpers at a push of a button, I think they called it. So so now you need to choose which one you want, and no longer are they male or female voices, they're just voice 1 to 4. Now we've seen previously, I think about 3 or 4 years ago, there was an experiment to have a completely neutral, non-gendered voice assistant. So it was kind of curious why they haven't gone for 5 voices, one where is completely genderless. It's like, well, why wouldn't you do that? So quite interesting. There is a video that you can watch on this article that actually shows the voices as well. So they are still on the spectrum of male to female, but it's up to you to choose now. I think is interesting. William Shatner, aka James T. Kirk, is 90 and has teamed up with a company called Storyfile to record himself for posterity. So the way this works is you go into a studio, you get asked a bunch of questions, and they are recorded using volumetric capture. So this is sort of 3D capture. Therefore, anybody who wants to ask you those questions again can listen to your responses, and they can be through, volumetric displays in the future, holograms essentially, or they can even be just used in AR, for instance, through your phone. So you can have William Shatner sat in front of you right now answering questions. Now, obviously, the questions he can answer are only the ones that he's been asked. It can't do any of that sort of future stuff where it can then start recording your brain and making up or not making up, but retrieving things you didn't actually say and having a conversation. However, I thought this was really interesting because I'm seeing more and more of these capturing the essence of humanity before you lose the chance, shall we say. This has gone a few ways. There was another thing I saw this week using brain-computer interfaces. Usually they have a little thing that goes into the brain with some electrodes. That's still there, but normally what happens is they have a big sort of umbilical, big cord. So they can only be either attached to a box, which is attached to a thing, or you actually have to sit in a chair with all these gubbins. But now they're wireless, so somebody can then have one of these brain devices listening to their brain activity 24/7 over Wi-Fi. They just need to recharge it. That's pretty much it. So it's quite interesting that you can now start to store the actual brain activity 24 hours a day of somebody as they go about their business. And also where this is interesting is Stephen Hawking's being a really famous example of this, having a speech synthesis of what you want to say. It's totally possible to use your own voice for that speech synthesis, but you need to capture your voice first. So people who have degenerative illnesses can actually do a process like this, which captures keywords, and therefore it can use that to recreate your voice and be used in typing or any device. So interesting. William Shatner, happy 90th, obviously, but look out for Storyfile and the like. Australia do it again. So we've seen them a couple of weeks, maybe a month ago, by challenging online news, or at least social media who's using online news, to pay for it. So Facebook said no, Google said yes, and lots of stories then ensued. So it seems like they're actually going at it again. This is the federal Australian government, I guess. So what they're asking for here is ID if you either run or sign up to social media, or dating, for instance. So this is all about cyberbullying, and making sure that people have some, or remove the anonymity that can be on some of these sites. So they want you to use your passport, your driving license, that sort of thing. I can't quite understand how they've done it, but they want sort of 100 points of identity, I think they called it. Not quite sure what that means. However, the whole point of this is if you are going to have a go at somebody online, if you're going to bully somebody, if you're going to say mean things, then you need to be identifiable, and therefore you need to actually have some accountability online. Now, this sounds great, sort of, until you get to the point where you say, okay, well, what about reviews? So if a review is a negative review, then you need to be identifiable. Somebody can come around and basically disagree with you personally, or they can also find out who you are and attack you, for instance. So it's not quite as simple as it sounds. There are counter arguments, very valid ones, on both sides of this one. So watch out for that. And finally, this is a digital download recipe book for people who are suffering from long COVID. So if you one of the symptoms of long COVID is what's called anosmia, or paranosmia, actually, is another one. So anosmia is you lose taste or smell, and paranosmia is it goes a little bit strange. So all of a sudden things don't taste or smell like what they used to. So that's happening quite a lot, and therefore there was this really interesting book, and the people behind this have got some experience of people with cancer who had anosmia and paranosmia, so that they know what they're doing. So anyway, they've found certain flavours that seem to be relatively similar for people who are suffering from this, from long COVID. So I think that's things like eggs and onions and garlic, things like that, and created a cookbook. Got me thinking, that's quite interesting about why wouldn't major manufacturers, seeing as this is quite a worldwide pandemic and is affecting a huge amount of people, maybe there might be two flavours of crisps, for instance. Your standard cheese and onion, and then you've got your COVID version of cheese and onion. So who gets on the bandwagon first with this one? If you're a brand that does food, maybe there's something in that for all the right reasons, not just PR. So there you go. I thought that was interesting. Hopefully that's useful, and I will speak to you next week.